the IEC has released a report which reveals the funders of political parties in the second quarter of 2022. The report published donations above 100,000 rand, which parties declared between July and September. Now, to discuss this, as well as developments around coalitions, is political analyst Professor Secrecy, who joins me via Zoom. Professor, good afternoon, and thank you very much for your time. Interesting developments from the DA this afternoon. I mean, on the face of it, it seems the party has no issue as such with supporting Mashaba for the position of mayor, but they say the problem is they would need the EFF's vote in Joburg, and they say they've learned from that. In 2016, it was a bad experience for them. They don't want to attempt that arrangement again. What's your take on that?
Well, it depends on how principled the DA is on this matter. If you take a political position that you'll not work with the EFF, and that position is also informed by experience, it is possible that the DA will stick to that position because from the get-go, the DA and the EFF are not reading from the same hymn sheet. But because at that time there was a need to keep the ANC outside the governance of Johannesburg, there was this arrangement. So the DA's position is that it has learned a lot from that, and it does not want to take that chance. But what it also does, it creates also a number of problems because when you talk about the coalitions, you also talk about compromise. And I do think that what the parties may need to do is to remind themselves of the mandate of the local government. And I think they'll find that there are many things that they'll agree on. One will be the provision of water, electricity, etc. The creation of an environment where business can thrive. I don't think any of them will be opposed to that. And also improving governance, service delivery. So there's a lot that parties can agree on that is less ideological. But it is more the personalities.
Professor, but the argument here by the Democratic Alliance is that they wouldn't be able to fulfill that very mandate that you speak of because it would be an unstable arrangement if they have the EFF this time, given what happened the last time. But beyond that argument, there's also something that now arises, a question of what happens in Tshwane. Because if they're not looking to support Herman Mashaba in Johannesburg, it could compromise their candidate, Randall Williams, in Tshwane.
Yes, I think when parties take strong positions, they need to know that something has to give. And there's an arrangement that they seem to have arrived at with smaller parties. And that seems to have been something that is sealed. But the DA probably understanding that it is in the center where many parties need it. It can also demand or try to optimize its own position to say, we stand for this and we have this experience, but we're not willing to risk and undermine the electorate again. So I do think it is a risk that the party should take. And if you listen to these parties, some of them are saying we are willing to go and become opposition rather than to compromise our stance. And I do think that the voters also want that level of principle stand. They do not want, their vote is not up for sale. They stand for something and they support the party because it stands for something. And having Helen Zille, who has been very clear about that the party should not compromise on its values and principles, it is possible that some of the coalition talks may collapse as a result of that position.
So clearly, as it stands, we could see them losing both Johannesburg and Tshwane, and they seem quite comfortable with that. But then onto the IEC party funding list. Much was made of it on social media. Everybody's talking about it. And some of them using that old adage that he who pays the piper calls the tune. Could we really say that funders would most certainly want to influence policy of any political party, or it's just purely individuals and organizations that are just pro-democracy?
No, there's no doubt that the funders would like to influence. But whether they can influence the policy of parties is something else. One must understand that there's what you call dialectical relationship between those who give money and those who are saying we want to support democracy. The democracy needs money for it to function. But the notion that says the people must govern is very important. This is why the notion of making party funding open so that people can tell whether the party they voted for is influenced by funders or whether it's influenced by what the party has given to the voters. So it is a case of also business people or funders. They will also fund parties that are sharing the same perspective of how society should be formulated or constructed. So there is what you call a mutually reinforcing interest in this. The parties need supporters, but the supporters say will support parties that think like us. So this mutually reinforcing is what fuels democracy. So, but ultimately you do have instances where party funders are so powerful that ultimately the people get neglected. You have parties where resolutions can get taken and the people come with the big bags, and suddenly parties forget what they told the people. They forget the commitment. They forget their resolutions because the funders have a lot of money. But once we know who the funders are, then we can also see that those who are elected are not accountable. So the party funding, making it open, is to promote both transparency and accountability, but also to make sure that the voters can tell whether they have voted for the wrong person who can easily be bought.
Perhaps to start with that point of yours where you say in most cases they share they have the same views on several matters in terms of governance. Then we come to the ANC's Chancellor House Trust. We know that it donated 15 million to the party, and the DA in particular is saying that that very arrangement of Chancellor House donating sought to somehow conceal the identity of the real funders of the political party. Why do you think it is then, if you argue that mostly these funders share the same views as a particular party, why in this instance would funders of the ANC want to remain anonymous if this is a party now that has been talking renewal and clean governance? Why all the secrecy?
Well, I think that's a matter that the DA and also society must actually take up, because you cannot go around and claim that you support openness, you support transparency. But when it comes to certain issues, you are the first to rush to say, no, this should not be known. And we've seen this, even the so-called NGOs, we've seen them take positions where when certain parties or individuals are involved, you have these organizations, foundations jumping up and down to say transparency is important, openness for democracy. But when it comes to certain individuals and parties, the very same groupings become silent. So what we have here, it's a hypocrisy. So the DA is correct to say, if it suspects that there are funders behind Chancellor House who want to remain unknown, those must be exposed, and they must use the law to challenge. They go to IEC to say we know that Chancellor House has the people who are funding it, and in terms of the law, this should be transparent. And what we see here is not transparency, is actually hypocrisy. So
but it must be stated, Professor, that at this point it hasn't been proven as fact. It's just the Democratic Alliance saying that they are concerned about the trust vehicle and whether people could have possibly funded through Chancellor House. But we'll certainly try to get to the bottom of that as well and speak to IEC to find out if they're going to look into it. But in closing, though, with the project of renewal that the ANC has been speaking of, one would think that many, like I said, would want to donate to the party openly at this point, but we only saw Patrice Motsipe's Rainbow Minerals literally being among those very, very few that decided to be open. Why again, I say, with this new this new leader at the helm, would there still be those that wouldn't want to play open cards?
Well, first of all, you need to understand that there's a lot of inconsistencies and also hypocrisy in this notion of renewal. And this is why also the public or the voters punch the ANC, that you say these things, but we see corruption continuously happening. And we see some people who are corrupted and who are corrupted being shielded. So what type of renewal are you talking about? So it's not an accident that the voters voted the way they did. They voted for a number of reasons, and what they are also saying is that we're not buying into this notion of renewal because we don't see it being implemented. If where it is implemented, we see it implemented selectively to target. That the ANC, what they've seen, that the ANC has been more embroiled, not so much with renewal and unity and all that. It has been more about settling political scores among its own members. So the people have seen that, and they have actually returned a verdict that we don't like what we see. It doesn't matter how you present yourself and project yourself, we are not buying it.
Professor Siepe, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. That's political analyst Professor Sipho Siepe there talking to us on the funding for political parties as well as the developments around coalitions that continue now.